Hey YouTube, it's Anthony with Quad Questions. Today we're going to solder an OSDOGE, and if you're not familiar with this little board, it's an excellent solution for FPV. If you're trying to do an FPV setup on a quad, you can use this. It's got an integrated LCfilter, it's got an integrated on-screen display, it stacks right on top of the Naze32, and it's just a great solution for cleaning up your quad and for doing FPV really easily. So today I'm going to be using a Naze32 full flight controller, and for this job I'll also need some extra flight controller mounting hardware to get this done. But after watching this, you should be able to easily figure out how to solder this and put it in your quad. So hope it helps. Okay, so the first thing that you have to be aware of with this is that you have to start with a brand new flight controller. If your flight controller already has your pins soldered, it's going to make this job really difficult. And so therefore I recommend that people just start with their flight controller brand new. Usually it's not too much of a hassle to just get a new flight controller to start over with this. If you're really ambitious, you can use a hot air rework station and pull your pins out, but again, that's just kind of a pain in the butt. So what you do is you start with your flight controller and you start with your on-screen display. So the DOA comes in this nice static sensitive bag. Just go ahead and pull it out. So when you look at this thing, you can see that on this board you've got your LCfilter, your OSD, and you've got some other important circuits on here, including a switch. But what we really want to focus on this are where the pins go from the OSDOGE to the Naze, which are the battery for VBAT. You've also got the ground VBAT here. You've got your stack for your serial connection here, and then, like I said, your 5-volt power here. And so this provides 5-volt power. You only need to give this thing your battery voltage, and it will drop down your battery voltage. 4S recommended, 3S it also works. If you get up to 6S it works, but it's kind of defeats the purpose of the filtering on the board. So you have to keep that in mind. You might need some extra filtering if you're running 6S batteries. But if you're running 3 or 4S, it's perfect, and it's engineered for that. So the first thing you want to do on your Naze32 full is do the side pins on here. You don't want to do this entire board and all of its pins before you try to attempt to put the DOA on. It's just not going to work. So I like to lay this thing down on my table when I solder this and just hit the first pin, usually pin number 3, to get started. And I keep my iron at a nice hot temperature. This one's about 675 degrees. So, like I said, it's easiest to do this on the table here. I always give my soldering tip a little bit of solder to get started. That gives it some flux and cleans it up very nicely. And then I just come in on pin 3 and put my iron straight down on the pin. Give it some solder. And even though that's crooked right now, what you can do is come in here and just put your finger down on the edge of the pin. As long as you're not touching the part that gets hot, you're usually okay doing this. But then I like to heat it up once more and just get this thing set in here. So that looks pretty good. So now I'll move it on over to my clamp to do the rest of this. So now that I have that first pin going and I've got this board on the clamp, it's really easy to just come in here and put my iron on the side of the pins and just give it some solder to get each one of them. And it doesn't take much, but you want to make sure that you see flow between the pin and the pad below. So that's that first half. And then I like to flip the board over and do the second half. Again, it doesn't take much, just a little bit of solder on each one. And I like to space my board. If you can see here, I've got my pin kind of to the side that allows me to get heat both on the pad and the pin, and it just makes for a better solder job. So and that's that one. So once you've got your side pins soldered here, the next thing that you want to do is take your female pins that come with the kit from the Doja. You can see they've got a hole on one side right here. They've got a header pin on the other, but you want to put these onto your OS Doja. So for this one, I'm going to put it on battery plus and minus, and then I'll take the other female header pin and I'll put this into the TX and RX. And then I'll take the final one and I will put it onto the 6th channel power and ground. Just like that. So you can see I've got it 6-channel power and ground on the TX and RX and here on the bat. So once you've done that, then you want to take the male half of these. So you can see on this that the top half of this has like a flat edge, and that flat edge goes against the board, and the bottom half has a rounded edge, and that rounded edge goes against the female sockets on here. So this rounded edge is what we're going to use today, and we're just going to feed it into the female socket. Put my female pins in, and then I'll come in with my male pins, which the male pins are also longer than the ones that go through the board. Just feed those in here. Pin number 2. Again, a tweezers can really help for this kind of job. Here's pin number 3 for VBAT. So once I have all those in, then I come in with the hardware that comes with the OS Doja. And this hardware is actually only half of the equation. You need to come in with this hardware that it comes with, and then also use your flight controller mounting hardware. You can get this at QuadQuestions.com. But you use this hardware underneath to build the cube, basically. So you take your header there and then just put the one that comes with the OS Doja kit right above it. I know this seems like a lot of work, but it's necessary with this kit. If you just were to try to stack the Doja on top and solder it, it wouldn't work very well. So you just have to do this part. And I don't know, it might help you to do yours maybe with the standoffs in first. So once you've got those 4 in, then you can take the Doja and stack it on top. So again, lining up the pins, you should have the USB ports stacked above each other, and then you just kind of push it down on. One thing you'll notice though is that if you just try to push it vertically down, those pins still don't line up. As you can see here, they're just kind of all crooked in there. So again, come in with your tweezers and just kind of move the pins over until they line up with the holes. And you want to keep pressure on both boards so that you don't have your pins falling out. But once you get it, it just snaps into place, and then you can go ahead and solder it. So once you apply pressure down like that, then you know that you're good. So I usually like to do just one side first, clamp it into my clamp here. And then I just like to come in and hit it quick with some solder. So right here I do my ground at 5 volts. Do my RX, my TX. And then also get the battery voltage. And the ground. So once I've done that and everything looks good, I like to flip the board over and do the other side. And this one's a little bit tighter, so usually I like to do 2 and then remove the 3rd. So I'll do the TX and RX on the bottom of this naze. And that kind of holds it into place. And then I like to take this one out. This wrench is available at QuadQuestions.com. Comes with the Sparrow Quad kit. But at any rate, I like to take that one out and then do the VBAT pins. And then again, I like to come in over here and do the final pins for this. Which are channel 6, ground, power. So now that that's done, you can remove the rest of your standoffs. Again, I like to use my tool that's available with the Sparrow Quad or at QuadQuestions.com, and just pull the standoffs out. And then once you get the standoffs out, you can see that these just separate just like that. And so if you've done it correctly, you should have all of your male pins here on the OSDOGE, as you can see. And then you should have all of your female pins on the naze. So you can see I got a female pin, female, and again, female here. So the next thing that you want to do after you've done this is solder the rest of your pins on your Naze32. So the normal Naze32 comes with this pin header here. And it really depends on how you decide to work your Naze32. So I like to run my pins when I do these underneath and back because it's more trick and it allows you to just make a nice clean installation. So I will actually cut these 2 off here. I like to cut them just right here. Cut the middle pin out, cut the ground pin out. Use your eye protection when you do this. But then that lets you stack this in nicely. Just like that. So that lets you do some trick wiring with your naze. So I'll flip this over and then solder this other side. Put this part. And then you can just do the rest. These little pads can be challenging, so I like to do one half and then the other half, and then I just kind of go sequentially from one to the next so that I don't get solder bridges, because solder bridges can make this really difficult. And using a fine tip soldering iron can really help here. And then again, once you've done that, it's time to do your 3-pin connector that's angled. And this connector actually doesn't work with the Doge, you have to modify it. So I'll actually modify this to make it work. So again, I'm going to cut it into a row of 2. Just like that. Pop my row of 2 on right there. And then I'll flip this guy over and solder. Again, I like to trick mine out, so a lot of times I'll do this and flip it over this way. The thing that you have to worry about is the serial connectors, so just make sure if you do this to angle it up as far as you can so that it doesn't affect the serial connectors. And then I like to hold on to one side and solder the other, and just very carefully, I'll just hold on to it like that, and then solder the side that I'm not holding on to. Let's see. A lot of guys like to use tape here too, so. But if you just set your solder on, you can usually just pull in enough to make this work. Just like that. So now that I've got that there, then the other side, you can see it's held in place, and it makes it really easy to come back in and do the rest here. Cool. And that's that. So once you've got that done, then you've got a full Naze32 soldered up and ready to go. You can just stack your OSDOGE right on top. Boom. And then you've got a nice, complete flight controller solution. So the only other things that we need to do is solder onto the Doge. And again, I like to do this as trick as possible. So I'll come in here, swap out my Naze with my Doge so you can watch. I like to bring my pins in underneath, just like this. And then again, use that pulling the solder trick to just come in here on one and hit it and just pull that solder in. So you saw how I pulled that solder in to that pin, so now I can go ahead and do the others here and just hit them up quick. And then again, you want to do it for your RSSI, your voltage 2, and your amps. Again, I like to do a trick, so I'll just come underneath. Just like that. Bring my solder in, do my pulling trick one more time. Boom. Solder the other side in. And then the last pins that you need to do are your voltage, which are up here. You can do either this way, or you can use straight pins. Here, you know, I'm not really a fan of connectors. I like to direct solder, but I do direct solder to pins sometimes, and so I usually like to just pull this one in underneath as well, just to continue with my clean look that I'm going for. And again, just come in with my solder, lay it across, and then just hit it and suck it in. See if I can do this so you can see it. Just like that. Get the other side. Cool. So once you have all your pins soldered on your OSDOGE, there's some other things that you need to look at on this thing. And these are particular to your setup. So if you are using a 5-volt video transmitter versus a 12 volts, then this is of particular importance to you. Same with your video transmitter. If it's 5 volts versus 12 volts, you also need to think about this. But there's these jumpers down here. The DOA comes pre-configured for a 12 volt camera, and most cameras are 12 volts, so that's not an issue. But you can tell that by this solder blob that's right here on this cam jumper. You can see that the blob's between the middle line and the 12 volt line, but that's what determines what voltage you have to your camera. So you can see on this other side, on VTX, there's nothing soldered. And this is left blank intentionally because you, as the builder, have to decide whether or not you want to use a 12 volt video transmitter or a 5 volt. And so what I will do for this is configure it for a 12 volt, because that's what we'll be using on this build. However, most Team Black Sheep video transmitters and other high-end video transmitters are 5 volts, and so you need to keep that in mind and make sure that you know which video transmitter you're using before you do this. So I just come in here in between 12 in the middle, throw a solder pad right on. And that's usually all it takes. This jumper in the middle is a ground jumper, so if you need to connect your video transmitter ground and your camera ground for some reason, maybe because you have your on-screen display working with your camera, but as soon as you maybe arm your quad or do something like that, you lose your video, then you would want to put a solder jumper there across those. So the only other jumper that you want to look at on this board is this one up here, and this is your RSSI filter. And if you're putting a RSSI signal into your on-screen display that's outputting a digital signal, you need to down convert it to analog before you can run it into your OSDOGE. And the DOA has a filter built in to do that, so you can just solder across these two jumpers up here, and that will filter that digital signal down. And so we'll go ahead and solder that right now too. And when you do that, you just want to see a nice healthy solder blob across the two pads on the bottom of the board. Make sure that you've got a good connection there. But so now when we run our digital RSSI into this, it down converts it to analog and makes it work with this DOA. So, and then as always with any board that I solder, and any board that you solder, you should go back through and just inspect all your pins, make sure they look good, make sure there's not too much flux on there. Coming back in and cleaning this with alcohol is always a good idea. You can just use a toothbrush and some rubbing alcohol to clean the flux off. Same with your Naze32. If you've got your Naze32 on here, you can sometimes get too much flux here, so it's always a good practice to just hit that with a toothbrush. And keep in mind that you've got a barometer on this thing up here, and you don't want to get alcohol in this, so just try to keep your alcohol away from this. And so now the beauty of the whole thing, you can see that because we worked hard to get these soldered in nice and straight, we should be able to just come in here and these boards just plug in straight together like that, and it just makes for a very, very nice solution for an on-screen display and all of your power. And it's a cube that you can just plug into your quad and go. You've got your VTX ground and power up here. So when you connect this up, cam is your video from your camera, power is power to your camera, ground is the ground to your camera. Then on the other side you've got ground, which is ground to your video transmitter, power to your video transmitter depending on what you selected, and then VTX is where you bring your video signal out to your video transmitter. And then also on here you've got these pins, which are amps. So if you want to have some external amp or current meter, you can do that with this pin. You've got RSSI, which you bring in on the middle pin here, and then you've got volt 2, so you can monitor a second voltage, say you're running 2 batteries or something on this pin. So on this side here, ground and VBAT, this is where you bring your power in from your battery. These are not reverse polarity protected, so if you do accidentally connect ground to VBAT and voltage to ground, you will fry the entire thing. So make sure that your polarity is correct when you do that. And other than that, the Naze32 just connects the normal way. You've got your outputs to your servos or ESCs here. You've got your UARTs here on these pins, and your output to your receiver, or input from your receiver here on the top pins 1, 2, and 3. Ground, power, and pin 1. If you enable PPM, you've also got your basic outputs, not for VBAT anymore because we're already monitoring that, but you've got your buzzer, and then you also have your telemetry if you decide to use that first UART on here. So hopefully that helps you, and if you're looking into getting an OSDOGE, you can get it at QuadQuestions.com. We work directly with Carl, who's the innovator behind this board. We also work directly with TimeCop, who's the innovator behind the Naze32, to bring these things to you at a good price, and we stand behind our products. So please subscribe to my videos, check out QuadQuestions.com, and let me know if this video helped or if you have any questions. Thanks for watching. Anthony out.